Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It is so exciting to be coming to you with another version of our podcast this week. These seem to be working out really well as we're not able to meet as much as we might like in the classroom, but hopefully these podcasts are providing some supplement to the reading. Our text is really diving into the area of situation and contingencies this week. And so I wanted to just supplement a little bit of that material in the text with some thoughts of my own and to kind of hone in on some real specific items of interest for us to think about over the course of the next few weeks. So today we are really going to be honing in on this idea of situation and contingencies and really talking about, so what does that mean, right? Well, there are a couple of things that we need to think about in context of leader behavior. Now, remember that we're talking about leadership through a couple of different lenses here. There's this idea of leadership as a casting variable, something that other people do. There's this idea of leadership style, and then there's this idea of leadership behavior. And the appropriateness of any one leader's behavior within a group often makes sense only in the context of the situation, right? So we've seen people do a lot of really odd things or things that may be very challenging for us to explain until we really understand what's going on with the situation. The situation oftentimes puts behavior within a context. Moreover, the situation, not somebody's traits or abilities, so not someone's distal personality characteristics or personality traits or their height or their weight, but rather the situation plays the most important role in determining who emerges as a leader within any one given context. So think about things that may elicit a response from you. So if I'm in a store, right, and I see a little girl and help, or I see a little boy and help a little one, having a little one of my own would draw me to say, hey, can I help? What's going on? If I see something out on the road, maybe I'll be inclined to stop. But it is the situation, right? It's the context at hand, not someone's traits or abilities, that plays the most distal role in understanding who emerges as a leader. Two things to think about with this. Great leaders typically emerge during economic crisis or revolutions. Why might that be the case, right? And second, it was believed at one point that leaders were made or not and not born, and that prior leadership experience helped forge those effective leaders. So where do you fall on these two statements, right? What do you think? Are great leaders typically emerging only during economic crisis or revolutions? When might there be other opportunities for leadership to flourish or to build? And what do you think about the idea of leaders being born here? These two things seem to fly in the face of the idea of situation and contingency. So let's think a little bit more about that. When we look at the idea of situational factors, we really do draw on this idea of role theory. And role theory is this. It's a leader's behavior, and it's that behavior is dependent on a leader's perceptions of several critical aspects of any one given situation. Things like rules and regulations that might govern their job, role expectations of subordinates and peers and supervisors, the nature of the task at hand, feedback about performance, and so on. And there are a couple of different things going on here. There are micro variables, things that are very nuanced, and macro variables, things that might govern a system, right? And then there are situational levels. There's task levels, organizational levels, environmental levels. And if we take a look at the figure 11.1 here, the expanded leader-follower situation model, we can see that these things overlap with one another, that there's this kind of overlapping and interrelating nature between leader, followers, and then the situation. But the situation isn't just one-dimensional. As I mentioned, there's the task, there's the organization, there's the environment, right? Task, we might ask about things like, well, what do you actually do? What does the job take? What are the distal tasks that are related with any one given job? The organization, we might think about, well, how are things run? Are there political or social issues? Are there environmental issues that we need to concern ourselves with? And then with the broader area of the environment, What really happens, what's going on with the industry, and how does all of that overlap with the idea of this situation, right? What's actually going on, and what are the factors that are influencing or constraining someone's particular behavior? Something to really pay attention to inside an organization, or when you see a leader acting in a certain way. Knowing the situation helps us understand what's going on. If we move this idea forward, we've talked a little bit about this, but in the information age, when we talk about knowledge work, many fundamental assumptions about the industrial age are becoming obsolete. These are things that we see and we know, but they're oftentimes very difficult to pick up in an organization. Changes that we have seen are the idea of cross functions. Think about how often now you work across functions with your teams. Think about how your linkages with your customers or your stakeholders or your suppliers have become closer in the last couple of years as work becomes more of a relational rather than transactional function. Customer segmentation, the global scale of our economy and product lines, the idea of innovation and how innovation has really kind of just blossomed as a result of things like YouTube and the internet and being able to access information at almost any readily given time. And then knowledge workers, right? The idea of knowledge workers really taps into that idea of motivation and engagement that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Knowledge workers are becoming the currency of the new organization. Not so much is it that we need to do rudimentary or mechanical or hard labor kinds of work, but rather we're asking people to make discretionary decisions at the moment of their task, which requires a different form of motivation. No doubt, as a result of that, organizations and leadership are changing. How might you have seen some of that occur? Well, there are a couple of models that we might be able to look at in terms of how we understand what's going on. So the model that we have up on our slide deck now is called the congruence model. And again, this is directly out of our text, figure 11.2. But the congruence model is based on a systems theory approach. So systems theory is suggesting that there's lots of influences that are influencing one another, and that no one aspect of the model can be taken in a vacuum. Each individual element plays a specific role. Inputs, things like the environment, resources and history; processes, things like work, people, formal organization, and the informal organization; outputs, things like systems, units, and individual performance. But really, the focus here is on the situational factors and how the process really kind of moves the model forward. So let's just take a look at that a little bit deeper. So, for example, the work factor really provides a framework to assess, describe, and categorize individual situational influences based on the components of the job characteristics model, which is something we've talked about in previous chapters. With the addition, however, of task structure and task independence here. So you can see that embedded within the model that we have. The people factor deals, when we kind of look at the middle of the model here. The people factor deals with all aspects surrounding the interactions between leaders and followers, with a particular emphasis on the impact of diversity. So understanding how different units of people interact, move, and influence other parts of the organization. The formal organization component addresses the importance of looking at specific organizational factors and how these influence the situation. For example, think about things like formal authority or structure or formalization or hierarchy within an organization. What are the formal structures that are in place? The informal organization component captures things like that influence the organizational culture and climate. These things include things maybe about how people tell stories, right? So, what can be talked about? How do people actually use and wield their power? How does one get ahead or stay out of trouble? What are the unwritten rules of working here? What are the morality and ethics codes here? How do we actually operate with each other? And what are the stories told, and how do people tell them? Stories are actually an interesting organizational narrative that we need to pay attention to. If we return to the systems theory again, one tenet here asserts that all systems attempt to stay in balance, right? So the idea of systems theory here is that we are attempting to stay in some kind of homeostasis, that there's a sense of balance across the entire system. Therefore, one thing we have to consider is that when leaders change or make changes or influence changes to the systems, it's very important to think about the potential implications or the ripple effect. Think about throwing a rock into a pond and watching that ripple kind of curse out from where that specific change happening. When we incur those ripple effects, we have to think about what are the implications for what is going to happen within the whole model. So for example, if we make changes to the formal organization or the informal or the work, or we make changes to resources or the environment, we must consider what is going to happen with the output. How does making a change to the formal organization change or influence the output at the system, unit, or individual level, right? We cannot drive change or drive systematic change by changing only one portion of the model. We have to understand that that model is going to play itself out. We have to think about this, not only from a leader perspective, but actually someone as a scholar perspective, as a leader scholar perspective, right? So if we move this idea forward, well, what do we do here, right? Well, there's this idea of social engineering. Well, are we talking about like Facebook or LinkedIn? Well, not really. What we're really talking about here is that the leader or follower can become more effective by identifying problem areas and restructuring or actually reframing the situation so that problems become easier to overcome. We reframe the challenge as an opportunity, and we reframe our perspective by identifying and restructuring. Again, think systems theory and how everything is interrelated and interdependent on various levels. Leaders and followers must think about how they can change the situation for everybody to be more satisfied and productive. There are a couple of things to think about this. Things like horizontal complexity, vertical complexity, and spatial complexity. Horizontal complexity meaning how do things run across units? Vertical complexity, what is the hierarchy? What is the structure, the vertical structure of the organization? And spatial complexity. Things like formalization and centralization, degree of standardizing or diffusion of decision making. And then the organizational culture and climate. Culture and climate are a bit different here. We might define culture as a system of shared backgrounds, norms, values, or beliefs among members of any one group, whereas climate might be things like a subjective reaction to the organization. We can actually change culture by attending to or ignoring particular issues, problems, or projects, but climate is that subjective reaction. As leaders, we have to understand how we affect those things. So, as kind of a final slide for today, there are differing perspectives on the same picture. There are a variety of different contingency theories of leadership. Our book specifically mentions four: the normative decision-making model, the situational leadership model, the contingency model, and path goal theory. These theories specify that leaders should make decisions and should influence their behaviors contingent on certain aspects of the followers or the situation. If you haven't read this in our text, go check these out. These are fascinating theories. All four of these theories implicitly assume that leaders can accurately assess key follower and situational factors, which may or may not be true. Perhaps a leader could accurately or positively identify these things. Perhaps it's possible, but all four theories implicitly assume the accurate assessment, and we have all been in situations in our own life where we've been inaccurately assessed, or our motivations have been inaccurately assessed. So you should take a critical eye to these theories, but also an optimistic eye into understanding how these contingency theories of leadership really can help us understand different behavioral patterns. So if you haven't yet, go check out normative decision-making model, situational, contingency, and path goal theory. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll wrap up for today. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you talking about the idea and the application of leadership. Have a great day. Until next time.